Good evening, everyone. So, this is Vidya Vardhani. I'm doing my master's in biochemistry and molecular biology. So, today I'll be presenting a paper from Molecular Cell, which talks about the transcription termination factor SEN1, which is involved in NNS complex. So, to begin with, in a cell, we know that transcription happens, which uses DNA as a template and makes RNA, which are then translated to protein. So, in this process, we know that coding genes are to be transcribed, but often it happens that instead of apart from transcription of the coding genes, there is also opportunistic transcription that is taking place. Okay, so in the process of this, there are many non-coding transcripts that are produced by the same RNA pol2. So this opportunistic transcription could happen either because of nucleosome depleted regions where there are no nucleosomes, or nucleosome free regions. Or it also sometimes these non-coding transcripts are produced from failed 3' end processing of coding transcripts. Say for example, imagine there is a coding transcript, a coding mRNA. If the polyadenylation site is not read by the RNA pol2, then it will continue. It will not terminate here. So the entire the subsequent transcript that is being generated is non-coding. So there are many instances in the cell when such opportunistic transcription events take place. So they will lead to production of non-coding transcripts. For example, cuts, SUTs. Cuts are cryptic, unstable transcripts which do not code for anything. They're non-functional, and these there are a few others called SUTs, which are stable unannotated transcripts, and many small RNAs, long RNAs, etc. So most of them do not have any function. Of course, we know other non-coding transcripts which have functions such as tRNAs, rRNAs, and so on. But there are a lot of non-coding transcripts which are just present in the cell without doing any function. So it is not useful for the cell. If they are not degraded, they can actually dampen the expression of coding mRNAs. So, say for example, our RNA polymerase is busy in transcribing these non-coding transcripts. What would the coding mRNAs do? Uh, the coding genes will not be transcribed, right? So it is very necessary for the cell to keep the non-coding transcription in control, because they can sequester the factors required for expression and metabolism of functional RNAs. So how are these taken care of? In yeast, that is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, there is a complex called NNS complex, that is NAD1 NAP3 SEN1 complex, which take care of degradation of such non-coding transcripts. So on the non-coding transcript or the RNA, non-coding RNA, NRD1 specifically recognizes the sequence GUA, and in the fourth position A or G, and NAP3 recognizes UC, UU, U or G. And then SEN1 is a superfamily 1 helicase. So what this does is, this is the cut sequence. Say for example, this is the position where non-coding transcript is being generated. This is the DNA. RNA pol2 is engaged here. It is transcribing this non-coding RNA. So NRD1 and NAP3 recognize this non-coding RNA, and then they bind to them at the sequences that are mentioned before. Then once these heterodimers are bound to these non-coding RNA, they recruit SEN1, which is a helicase. The recruitment of SEN1 will cause, actually this NRD1 and NAP3 have a C-terminal, these have a site interacting domain which binds to the C-terminal domain of the RNA pol2. So this binding and the recruitment of SEN1 will disengage the RNA pol2 from the DNA transcript, so that now the RNA pol2 is no more engaged in transcription. This is made free, and then SEN1 leaves from this complex. Now the bound on NRD1 and NAP3 recruit exosome via many other factors such as TRAM4, TRF4, and etc. And now once the exosome recognizes these factors, it will cause the degradation of the entire non-coding RNA such that there is no trace remaining of the non-coding RNA. This is especially true for cuts and SUTs. And then coming back to our normal coding genes, what happens here is, how does the transcription end here? for example, this is the coding region and it has to end somewhere here. Now, RNA pol 2 is transcribing this. This is our mRNA. Now, what happens is, we know that most of our coding genes have a polyadenylation site at the 3' end. So once the RNA pol 2 encounters the polyadenylation site, it recruits the cleavage factor 1 and cleavage factor 1A and 1B. So the binding of the cleavage factors onto the polyadenylation site recruit another factor, another complex called CPF, which is cleavage and polyadenylation factor. Now, when this cleavage and polyadenylation factor recognizes this polyadenylation site, PAS, it cleaves it right there. So once it cleaves, it also polyadenylates some more of the transcript. So you have a poly A cap at the 3' end. Now, when you break this, you have a 5' cap here, where the broken site is there. One is the polyadenylated site, and the other end is a free uncapped 5' cap. So this cap, the RTA1 and other exonucleases present in the cell degrade this entire transcript. So there is no non-coding transcript from this area. So this is how the mRNA transcription takes place, and this is how the termination takes place. Now the messenger RNA, as we know, will go to the cytoplasm and then it is translated into protein. So with this introduction, NNS, apart from terminating the non-coding transcripts, is also involved in regulation of mRNA genes by attenuation. What this means is, most of the times there are excessive mRNA produced. This might be cytotoxic. This might kill the cell. So in such cases, some studies show that NNS gets involved here and it controls the mRNAs. It sometimes degrades them when not in use. And then it is also involved in fail-safe termination of highly transcribed mRNA. Say, for example, as I was speaking in the first slide, if a polyadenylation site is read through by the RNA pol 2, this will lead to the subsequent downstream genes also being transcribed, which will not be really necessary for the cell. In that case, NNS has a role in terminating the transcription even there. So what we know from previous studies is that the cellular abundance of these molecules. NRT1, there are around 550 to 20,000 copies in the cell. And NAP3, the copies are 2,000 to 6,000. And the pol 2 RNA pol 2 molecules are 600 and 1,000. But interestingly, CEN1 molecules are the number is between 64 to 500, which is way, way less than everything else. Right. So the researchers thought that this low copy number could probably suggest that CEN1 shuffles between NRD1 and NAP3. So what they think is that, say for example, you have an on-coding RNA. First, while it is being transcribed by RNA pol 2, NRD1 and NAP3 go and recognize that, they sit on that. So this heterodimers will go and bind to that non-coding RNA. They will effectively wait for the CEN1 to come. CEN1 is not originally present, but then CEN1 comes and then binds to that and disengages the RNA pol 2. And then it will go back to another NRD1 and NAP3 heterodimer. So that is how, they think that is how the cell is able to manage even with such low numbers of CEN1. So they made the speculations that CEN1 levels are being adjusted according to cellular demand, because as we know, transcription is most active in S phase. So most probably this CEN1 should be present in high copy numbers in S phase and not required in G1. G1 where replication and transcription are not really that active. And then also control of CEN1 and RNA termination throughout the cell cycle are critical, because if you are assuming that their levels would be low in G1, there should be some significance, right? So in this paper, they wanted to know why such regulation is important. So coming to the experiments they've taken, the first hypothesis. CEN1 protein levels and activity fluctuate throughout the cell cycle. So first they assume that CEN1 protein levels are going to fluctuate throughout the cell cycle. Guys, I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'll be going through a lot of techniques. If it becomes difficult to understand any of the techniques, just please let me know so that I'll explain it on deep. So in the first experiment, they've taken cells which had C-terminally MYC tagged CEN1. So we know that whenever we do not have antibodies against certain proteins, we tag them with MYC. So in these cells, what they've done is the CEN1 protein, they have tagged with MYC on the C terminal. And then all these cells were arrested by alpha factor. What this alpha factor does is it synchronizes all the cells to G1. It causes G1 cell arrest. So, for example, if you're taking a population of cells and then adding alpha factor, no matter what stage the cells are in, after this treatment, they'll all come and stop at G1, especially late G1. So from now on, when you release, that is when you wash off the alpha factor from the media, they'll all be in G1, and from there they'll start, right? So they'll all be in synchrony. First, all of the cells will go through G1, then S, then G2, and so on. So that is how they started this experiment. And then when they are released, they wanted to see how the levels of SEN1 are being regulated. So in this is the immunoblot diagram. So these are the asynchronous cells which were present in all phases, and then they are arrested with alpha factor. Then after release, they started from 0 minutes. They collected some cells at 0 minutes, and then again at 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, and so on till 135 minutes. So after collecting these cells, they lysed them and then isolated protein via the SEN1 anti-MYC tag. So as you can see, the cells collected from 0, 15, and 30 show very low expression level of SEN1, while from 45 minutes, 60, and so on, the levels started slowly to increase. This suggests that during G1, we know that how the cell cycle is regulated, right? During the first 30 minutes, the cell cycle is going through the G1 phase, and then it will go to S phase, G2, MG1, and again asynchrony comes in. So the result is very evident, right? So the expression of SEN1 during G1 is low, and it is increasing towards S and G2 phase. So there was something in this that was degrading the protein. And then you really cannot see like whether the cells are in G1 or G2 or S. So they wanted to confirm this. You cannot just depend on the timings, right? So they made a FACS analysis in which you have the 1N DNA content and the 2N DNA content. In the asynchronous cells, you will have both 1N containing cells and 2N containing cells. Whereas after synchronization, initially everything was in G1, then slowly started shifting to G2 and S and G2, where your DNA content doubles. And again, asynchronous sets in. This is one way to monitor your cell, which cell say in which phase your cell is. And then they've taken controls that phosphoglucokinase, which is constant throughout the cell cycle, and then SIC1, whose expression we already know that it increases in G1 and decreases towards S and G2. So now we know that whatever result we are seeing is yes, we are looking at the cell cycle. So the first result is that yes, SEN1 protein levels are reduced in G1 and increased towards S and G2. Now they wanted to see if mRNA is also being regulated. Here we are looking at protein, right? So they wanted to see if mRNA or the DNA, the transcription from DNA of S1 is also being regulated. But then they observed that this is an RNA blot where SEN1 mRNA is being looked at. So even in asynchronous cells or during G1, S, and G2, mRNA levels are almost same. There is less than 2%, two-fold change in the mRNA level. So they said that no, mRNA is being produced, protein is also being produced of SEN1, but protein is being degraded. So the reduction is post-transcription and not pre-transcription. And then now here, there is a possibility. I was speaking about these cells which had the SEN1 tagged with MYC at C terminal, right? So it is probable that this results in G1. It is probable that the C terminal is undergoing partial proteolysis, and that is why we are seeing reduction in the MYC expression. So to eliminate that, what they've done is they made an antibody against N terminal of SEN1. So initially we were looking at the C terminal, now we are looking at the N terminal. So they tagged the, sorry, they did not tag anything here. They just took the N terminal specific antibody of SEN1 and then isolated the cells again. So what they've done here is that these are the asynchronous cells, the proteins from asynchronous cells, and these for alpha factor arrest. That is, these are arrested in G1 phase, and hydroxyurea was used to arrest cells in S phase, and nocodazole was used to arrest cells in prometaphase. So this is giving an idea of what the cell protein levels look like in during mitosis in S phase and G1. And again, even here, they found that SEN1 levels are reduced in G1 while they are fairly similar in S and PM phase. And we know NAP3 levels are never known to alter at all. So their expression is consistent. And again, SIC1, which I was talking about, is higher in G1 and lower in S and PM phase. And TBP, Tata binding protein, is also similar throughout the cell cycle. So these are just controls to make sure that we are looking exactly at SEN1 and the cell cycles. So finally, they wanted to again make sure if we are arresting the cells with alpha factor, right? There is a possibility that alpha factor is somehow reacting with your SEN1 during G1, and that is the reason. So they did not want to use alpha factor to arrest the cells now. So what they've done is they elytrated. There is a process called elytration in which the cells are separated based on molecular weight. We know that in G1 there is less DNA content, so the cells will be separated from those cells which are having a G2 DNA content. So they performed elytration and then they collected G1 specific cells based upon their molecular weight and again saw the SEN1 expression levels. So again they found that in G1 SEN1 is low and towards G1 S and G2 SEN1 is increasing. They've used these controls again. So now we can say that SEN1 reduction is not due to C-terminal partial proteolysis and not due to alpha factor arrest 2. So now they've confirmed that SEN1 reduction is really happening in the cell. So what next? So SEN1 is limiting in the NNS complex. NRD1 and NAM3 are ample in the cell, but SEN1 is limiting. So will the activity of NNS raise during G2? Yes, it should actually raise, right? Because there is ample of SEN1 in G2. So what they've done is they've taken SNR13. This is a small nuclear RNA, and it is stable. It is one of those non-coding RNAs, but then it is stable. It is not immediately degraded. So its termination depends on NNS, APT, and CF1A. These are all transcription termination complexes. I've already spoken about NNS, and this is with APT is associated with PTA1, which is also involved in transcription termination. And then CF1A, I was talking about this in the first slide, if you remember. And then they looked at this subunit. There is a PCF11 subunit, which is important for the functioning of CF1A. So now what the consequent essay is, if the transcription termination was active, it was effective, then SNR13, once the SNR13 is transcribed, there would be transcription stop here, it will be terminated, and the structure, this is the SNR13, this would form. And this is the downstream. Downstream of SNR13, we have TRS31 gene. If transcription termination did not occur in transcription termination mutants, what we would find is a bicistronic RNA, which will consist of both SNR13 and TRS31. So they've taken different types of cells, wild type cells, PCF11 temperature mutants, SSU, this is a mutant of APT, and then SEN1 temperature mutant in which SEN1 itself is faulty, and then an NRD1 temperature sensitive mutant. So in the wild type cells, you have ample SEN1, right? In G1 there is no transcription occurring. You would not find this, right? Because there is no transcription occurring at all. So SNR, this one you would not find in wild type. And then because SEN1 is present in prometaphase, that is mitosis, there is no, this would not be found. Whereas in PCF11 temperature sensitive mutant at permissive temperatures, you are finding this in G1. Because in G1, SEN1 levels are low, right? So you would find this. Since SEN1 levels are low, transcription termination is not happening. So this entire thing is being transcribed. Hence, you find the band in G1. Whereas in coming to prometaphase, that is mitosis, you can see that there is significant reduction in the SNR13 bicistronic RNA. Again, when you shift them to non-permissive temperature, we know that the transcription termination is defective, and hence you would find the band in G1 because SEN1 is low, and then transcription termination mutants, of course, because this is being read through. Whereas similarly, you find similar results in other transcription termination mutants that during PM, since SEN1 is low and these are transcription termination mutants, sorry, SEN1 is high and transcription termination mutants are faulty at non-permissive temperatures. The SNR13, this transcript is being seen. Whereas in SEN1 mutant, in SEN1 temperature sensitive mutants, you find that both in G1 and PM, this transcript is high. The levels of this transcript are high because SEN1 itself is mutated here. So we now know that, yes, in G2, transcription termination is occurring because SEN1 levels are high. And then NNS is being active. So this is the experiment which they showed that limiting SEN1 in G1 causes reduced termination efficiency at SNR13, because you can see that at G1 levels, this transcript level is high because SEN1 is low. And then they went on for the second hypothesis saying, now we see that SEN1 is being degraded. Now it is possible that it is being degraded. It should be either, right? One is lysosomal degradation or the other one is the proteasome degradation. So they've taken cells and transformed them with plasmids which encode MIG-tagged SEN1, that is C-terminally MIG-tagged SEN1, and they kept this under the control of GAL-inducible GAL1 promoter. So if we are providing galactose in the media, then the GAL1 promoter will be active and help transcribe the SEN1. So this is the experiment. Initially, they took the asynchronous cells, grew them in raffinose for like 120 minutes, and then arrested in G1 or metaphase using alpha factor and nocodazole. Then, once all the cells were in synchrony, they induced transcription. They induced expression by providing galactose in the media. So now all the SEN1 cDNA will be expressed via mRNA. And then after 15 minutes of induction, there are ample number of mRNA that will be produced during this. And then they removed the galactose and replaced it with glucose, this will not allow the expression of the SEN1 cDNA. And now for 45 minutes, this glucose repression continued. And then during this phase, all the mRNA that was transcribed is continually being synthesized, being translated to SEN1 protein during all of this phase. Then they added cyclohexamide, which halts the translation. It stops the translation. So whatever protein has been formed till now is going to be present for your further experiment. So from here, they collected cells at 0 minutes to 60 minutes. So there are two types of cells. One were arrested in G1 and the others were arrested in metaphase. So if you look at the G1 or alpha, that is alpha factor arrested cells, the protein was visible till 15 minutes and then it slowly disappeared because no more translation is happening. Whatever protein was there was initially present, but then it was degraded. Whereas if you look at metaphase arrested cells, the protein is not being degraded. Whatever the protein was translated until here, after translation, it was not being degraded. So now we know that SEN1 is unstable only during G1, but its levels are constant during metaphase. So even this quantification says that the dark lines represent the G2 phase and the light line represents the G1. So during G1, the SEN1 was unstable. Initially, its level were equal to that of whatever the cells, but then slowly it got down and it was down regulated. Now they wanted to see if the proteasome system was really responsible for all of this. They've taken two proteasome inhibitors, MG132 and MG262. So now in the alpha arrested cells, if the proteasome was inhibited, what would you expect? If the proteasome was inhibited, we would expect that SEN1 levels will remain constant. And if proteasome level is active, is not inhibited, then obviously it will go and degrade the protein. So if you see in this first 5 lanes, these were the asynchronous cells then arrested. In the first 5 cells, you could see that these first 5 lanes did not add the proteasome inhibitor. So yes, SEN1 was initially present, but then it got degraded. around 30 to 45 minutes. Whereas in where the proteasome inhibitors were added for these lanes, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th lanes, what happened was proteasome was inhibited and hence SEN1 MYC levels were constant. They did not get degraded. And also they looked at polyubiquitin molecule. In this case, since ubiquitin marks the proteins for degradation, they were all being used up because proteasome was degrading all of them. But in this case, since proteasome was inhibited, though they were marked, but they couldn't be degraded. So you could see the accumulation of ubiquitin. So this says that yes, SEN1 is degraded by ubiquitin proteasome system. And then they went further for another hypothesis saying SEN1 degradation is initiated through APC-mediated ubiquitination. So actually APC is a E3 ubiquitin ligase and is responsible for protein degradation. So this APCC complex requires two cofactors. One is CDC20 and the other one is CDH1. And CDC20 is utilized for protein degradation during G2 and S phase, whereas CDH1 is used for degradation of proteins during G1 phase. Since our protein is being degraded in G1 phase, we are assuming that probably it is due to this CDH1. So in this experiment, what they've done is they've taken cells arrested in raffinose, and then this is the permissive temperature, and then they've induced the expression of SEN1 by producing galactose in the media, and then again repressed, and then chase experiment. So they've done these experiments in APC temperature sensitive mutant, that is CDC27. So now this is the wild type cell and this is the mutant cell. This is a mutant of APC, right? So now in the wild type cell, you would obviously observe the trend of decreasing SEN1 in G1, and then again it would increase later. But in case of temperature sensitive mutant, SEN1 MYC is being constant, which means that yes, APC is the reason for which the SEN1 is being degraded. And again, they had a control, TBP, which tells us that yes, we are looking at the correct cycle. So now we know that the APC is responsible for the degradation of our SEN1 protein. And then now what they've done is, it could be possible that now we are using for prometaphase arrest, we were using nocodazole, right? So probably the SEN1 stimulation that we are looking at there is probably due to maybe nocodazole was being involved there, or APC is not being involved. So they wanted to eliminate that. In this case, what they've done is they've tried to arrest metaphase cells in PM by not using nocodazole, but instead PDS1. So what is this PDS1? In G2 M phase, if you remember from the cell cycle, what happens in G2 is that our cells need to be, the chromosomes need to be segregated, right? Sister chromatids. At the centromere, they are secured by securin, which is bound by PDS1. So when APC interacts with CDC20, this will go and bind the PDS1 and degrade this. So PDS1 is degraded, our securin is degraded. Once securin is degraded, the sister chromatids will separate. So if you want to keep your cell arrested in metaphase and not proceed further, you could stop PDS1 from being degraded, right? So that will give you metaphase arrested cells. So they've done that here, in which PDS1 was made undegradable, and then they maintained the arrest. So if you can see in G1 alpha factor arrest, you know that the SEN1 would decrease, whereas in metaphase, even though you did not use nocodazole, by maintaining the PDS1 levels and not letting them degrade, they were arrested. And now we know that yes, nocodazole was not involved, but APC inhibition was actually that is being done. And these are the results. Of course, in G1, SEN1 levels are low. In the metaphase, SEN1 levels are high. So now we know that APC is responsible for SEN1 degradation during G1. Yes, it is proteasome mediated, and then APC is regulating it. Okay, now levels of SEN1 protein affect viability. They've taken next hypothesis saying that why should the SEN1 proteins be regulated? What happens if it doesn't be regulated? So, if actually in the proteins that the CDC20 and CDH1 are going to degrade, they recognize a few sequences. CDC20 recognizes a D box, which is arginine XX, lysine XXS, and N. So in this, CDC requires a D box present in the non-coding transcript, whereas CDH1 requires a CAN box. This is the sequence of the SEN1. What they found that what they found is there is a 40 amino acid sequence present in the SEN1 sequence, which contains of CAN box. You can see the CAN box here. So they thought if we delete this from the SEN1, will it not be degraded? Because CDH1 is the one recognizing this sequence and calling the APC and the proteasome and so on. So they wanted to see the phenotype of the cells and how the SEN1 is being regulated in case they deleted this. So what they've done is they transform the cells with plasmid containing MICTAC SEN1 under the promoter GAL1 promoter, which is inducible by galactose. And variants in this SEN1 position, they used other variants like SEN1 from which 459 to 498, the 40 amino acid motif was deleted, or the CAN box was substituted with alanine, and so on. Many variants they used. So in the SEN1 wild type plasmid, you can see that yes, SEN1 is being degraded because it had normal CAN box and so on. So it was being degraded. But in case when SEN1 from the SEN1, when this 40 amino acid motif that was carrying the CAN box, the recognition site for CDH1 was deleted, SEN1 was stabilizing. As you can see, it was stabilized. And then they made another observation when CAN box was substituted with alanine. In some other in some other reports, they showed that alanine substitution will stabilize or destabilize your SEN1. It is recognizable by CDH1. So what they've seen is your alanine substitution of CAN1 failed to stabilize the protein. You can see that it is being degraded. It is not somewhere at some point, though it is low, but it is being degraded, which means that apart from this CAN box, the CDH1 is also able to recognize alanine motifs, right? So they concluded that we cannot say that degradation of SEN1 is exclusively because of this CAN box or the CDH1 recognition, but there could be other possibilities also. So from this study, they concluded that deletion of the 40 amino acid led to stabilization of SEN1. Yes, there is something in this 40 amino acids that is being recognized by CDH1 and leading to its degradation. But alanine substitution is also leading to protein destabilization. But alanine is not recognized by CAN1, but it is similar to the CAN box, but not exactly the CAN box. So they said that SEN1 degradation depends on amino acids that resemble APC motifs, but does not allow them to conclude like whether SEN1 acts solely as an APC CDH1 substrate. So now, again, they wanted to check the read through. You remember the SNR13 TRS31 read through, right? In the wild type cells, you would not find such a trace, whereas in the vector, where SEN1 is not present, these are the SEN1 temperature mutant cells, where SEN1 is dysfunctional. In the empty vector, when these cells were transformed with empty vector and at non-permissive temperatures, the transcription termination is not perfect. So you would see a SNR13 TRS31 bicistronic RNA and hence the band. Whereas when these cells are transformed with wild type SEN1, you would not see any read through. But when from the SEN1 459 to 498 the 40 amino acid motif was deleted, you see that SEN1 did not degrade, and then here you did not see the transcript. I think I'm clear, because when you remove the 40 amino acid, it is SEN1 will not be targeted by the CDH1. It will be present. So when SEN1 is present, your transcription termination will be fine, and hence you would not see this bicistronic transcript. So yes, they concluded that this motif, 40 amino acid motif, was indeed required for degradation. Now they wanted to look at the phenotype where what happens to the phenotype of yeast if this SEN1 is not degraded. We know that SEN1 is being degraded in G1. What happens if it is not degraded? Why is it being kept low? So for this, they made this assay in which they have taken one strain HY459, in which there is a plasmid, Ura3 plasmid, which contains the wild type SEN1. Originally, this strain has its genomic SEN1 deleted. Okay, so now SEN1 is essential. If the SEN1, since the SEN1 is essential, if you delete the genomic copy, the cell will die. So to complement for that loss, they've put in SEN1 in a plasmid, Ura3 containing plasmid. And then in the same strain, they have had one site where leucine 2 is placed in the the TRP1 is replaced by leucine 2. That is, leucine 2 is inserted in the TRP1 locus. Okay, then they've transformed this with various types of plasmids. These plasmids are all yeast centromere vector with tryptophan 1. Okay, now why did we do this? I'll come to that. I'll come back to that. So these cells in separate experiments. In one experiment, you would transform them with empty vector. In the next set, you will transform them with SEN1. This is wild type SEN1. And in the next set, you would transform them with SEN1 in which 459 to 498, the 40 amino acid region is deleted. And then in the next set, you would replace the Ken box with alanine. Now what would happen is, how would we select these? Now what should happen is, now when we are transforming this, the empty vector will be present, Ura3 plasmid carrying SEN1 would be present, and this locus in which tryptophan is replaced by, leucine is inserted in place of tryptophan would be present. So how do we select this? We will grow them on a plate which does not contain tryptophan, neither leucine nor uracil. So only those cells which will contain this query plasmid and the Ura3 SEN1 containing plasmid and then the leucine insertion would grow on such plate, right? So this is the first control growth that we are looking at. So in this control, look, this is a minus W LU plate where tryptophan is not present, leucine is not present, and then uracil is also not present. So all the cells which have successfully transformed, that is the one having these plasmid and the query plasmid, and this site will grow on this perfectly well. And now they're transformed onto another plate in which they have 5 FOA. Okay, what this FOA does is that it will whatever Ura3 is being generated from this, transcribed from this, being produced from this plasmid, will be converted to toxin, a certain type of toxin which will kill the cells in the presence of FOA. So now why are we doing this? We've complemented our genomic SEN1 with plasmid carrying SEN1. So if the empty vector comes here, the cell should die. We know that, yes, now the empty vector is there. If SEN1 was there, even if you kill the cells containing this plasmid, your SEN1 would be able to compensate. And then why we do this assay is that we want to kill all the cells that are having this but instead having this plasmid inside them. Successful transformation has taken place and this was shuffled out. And then now we want to see the phenotype of this inside this cell. I hope I'm clear with that. If you have any doubts, just let me know. Now, in the query plasmid, what we would see is that the plasmid carrying the wild type SEN1 was deleted. Now there is only empty vector. So what would the cells do? They would die. Yes, we are looking at the empty vector containing cells, they would die. And in the cells that were carrying wild type SEN1, they would live because yes, SEN1 is present and then transcription termination is perfect and cell has everything it needs, it will survive. Whereas in SEN1, where the CAN box was deleted from the 40 amino acid motif, they observed that the cells were sick. They were not able to grow when this plasmid was transformed and this was shuffled out. And they have performed this twice to get the significant result. Yes, they observed both of them, which states that when you're removing this 40 amino acid, the degradation recognizing motif was being deleted. Now, which means that SEN1 is not being degraded. SEN1 is present. So when SEN1 is being present and not being degraded, the cells were synthetic sick. That is, they were dying. They did not want the SEN1 to be present at all times. They wanted to be not present during G1. So this persistence of SEN1 is also leading to the death of the cells. And again, alanine substitution, they saw that yes, it was killing the cells, not to much extent as that of the 40 amino acid, but yes, it was degrading the cells. So what we know from this assay is that SEN1 protein stabilization in G1 leads to reduced cell fitness and viability. The SEN1 has to be destabilized in G1 or else the cells are showing less viability. So now they moved on to take the next hypothesis saying toxicity of SEN1 overexpression is related to its termination function. They're assuming that probably there is something happening in termination. Probably there more, even the coding mRNAs are being terminated prematurely or something is happening because of SEN1 overexpression. So to confirm this, what they've done was they've taken multi-copy galactose-inducible plasmid. The previous ones were not multi-copy, but in this there are multi-copy galactose-inducible SEN1-MYC plasmids which cause SEN1 stabilization. From the previous observations, what they knew was this expression from multi-copy plasmids caused SEN1 stabilization by overwhelming the proteasome, probably because there were so many copies of SEN1 that the proteasome couldn't degrade them. So they made an assay in which glucose is the off state where your SEN1 expression would not be there because it is under the control of the GAL promoter, right? So only when you put them on glucose, they would grow. So what do these results say? In the wild type cells, when the cells were transformed with vector, empty vector, they would grow in the glucose substrate because you have SEN1 already present in the wild type. So all of this growth you can explain. And in this galactose, even when galactose is on, they would grow because it is an empty vector. There is only the minimal expression of SEN1, whatever is there in wild type. But when you are expressing SEN1 in the wild type cells under multi-copy plasmid, galactose in the on state would produce so many copies of SEN1 that the cell is dying. So overexpression of SEN1 is toxic here, as you can see. And they've taken this at two temperatures, 25 degrees Celsius and 37 degrees Celsius as permissive and non-permissive, though it is not related to wild type. It is a control for the temperature sensitive mutant of SEN1. So in the temperature sensitive mutant of SEN1, what they observed is that in the glucose media, that is the GAL promoter is in the off state. Of course, the empty vector would give a normal growth, whereas even in the off state, you see that this cell does not have a genomic SEN1, right? It is a temperature sensitive mutant. That is at non-permissive temperature, it does not have any functional SEN1. So, of course, in the empty vector, they would die, right? But in the SEN1, when the plasmid is carrying SEN1, it shouldn't grow in glucose, right? Because galactose is the one that is going to induce the plasmid. but you still see the growth in the glucose off state in the presence of plasmid carrying the SEN1. Why was this so? They explain that this is because though the expression of SEN1 is in the control of galactose promoter, there is often a leaky a leaky level of expression even when glucose is produced. It is not very stringent, right? Only when you produce glucose it is going to express. Sometimes it happens that there is a leaky expression and the cell would still express SEN1. So that's little low level of leaky expression was enough. That was enough for the survival of SEN1. Whereas your overexpression on the galactose was extremely toxic. So what they concluded from this is that there is a window of optimal SEN1 concentration range. A very low level is okay, but a very high level is not okay. The cell dies. This is also in conjunction with the other observation that we made, that the persistent SEN1 is harmful for the cell. If it is not degraded, it is harmful. It is overexpressed, it is harmful. But leaky expression was fine. So again, they looked at the transcription read-throughs, SNR13, TRS31. So in the wild type cells, you would not observe this bicistronic transcript because transcription termination is fine. Whereas in temperature sensitive mutants, when empty vector, this is at non-permissive temperature, when the empty vector is present on the glucose media, you would find the SNR13 bicistronic transcript because there is no S1 to degrade this. Whereas when SEN1, the low leaky level expression here is enough to produce enough SEN1 that could make your transcription termination efficient. Whereas in this again, you would see that in the empty vector, you would find a bicistronic RNA because transcription termination is inefficient. But the thing is that here SEN1 is able to terminate the transcription, but somehow it is killing the cell also. It is cytotoxic. It is performing its function of transcription termination, yes, but it is somehow toxic to the cell. So they took two models. They proposed two models to check this. So what is happening? SEN1 is efficient in transcription termination even at very high levels. It was able to stop the transcription, but what is happening? Why is the cell dying? Why are they synthetically sick when SEN1 is overexpressed? So they proposed two models. One is the sequestration model, which says that in the low SEN1, when the levels of SEN1 are low, when the levels of SEN1 are low, there is the presence of, this model actually explains the presence of another interaction partner which is interacting with SEN1. So low level SEN1, few of the interaction partners would be free and they would be performing function A, and few of the interaction partners would interact with SEN1 and in conjugation, in complex with SEN1, they're performing some other function, say function B. So what is happening when SEN1 is being overexpressed is that the interacting partner is not able to perform its function because most of the interaction partners are being in complex with SEN1 because SEN1 copy number is very high. All the SEN1 are engaging the interaction partner, and hence it is only being able to perform function B and it is losing the ability to perform function A. This was one model. And then the other model is excess activity model, in which SEN1 in the first two lanes there is no SEN1 expression. This is what happens in wild type. So there is a promoter here, transcription occurs here, there is polyadenylation site, it will be encountered, SEN1 is fine, it is not overexpressed, and it will the transcription termination will occur. Whereas in termination mutant, what would happen is that it would cross the polyadenylation site and go further if SEN1 is not overexpressed. This is in the presence of normal levels of SEN1, okay? Whereas in overexpressed state, what you would find is, since the SEN1 is being overexpressed, wild type cells will be prematurely terminated. Whereas your termination mutant, in the termination mutants, instead of prematurely being terminated, they'll come till the polyadenylation site and then stop. Instead of going further, in the presence of overexpression, termination mutants should show normal transcription termination. I hope this is clear. When the SEN1 overexpression is there, termination mutants will show normal termination under the condition of overexpression. So they wanted to test both of these models. In order to test the sequestration model, they expressed plasmid again, which is carrying SEN1 MYC under the GAL promoter in deletion mutant strains, in a huge number of deletion mutant strains of interaction partners. Like they proposed that probably the SEN1 would be interacting with RAD2, RNT1, and SRS2. So they've taken those deleted cells, in the cells in which your interaction partners were deleted. So if the interaction partners were deleted, what should we see? We should see that there is no toxicity. Even high level expression of SEN1 should not kill the cell, because you are deleting the interacting partners. SEN1 is able to perform its function, and uh, um, both function A and function B are stopped in case there is interaction partner is deleted. So in the wild type cells, in the glucose off condition, you would see that cells are growing well, and the galactose on, yes, when there is empty vector, they would grow. And in the presence of SEN1 in the wild type, there's overexpression, right? The cells would die. So in what they expected is, if you deleted all of these genes, SEN1 overexpression toxicity should increase further, right? So, but what they observed was SEN1 expression, overexpression was not was not increasing toxicity. It is the same as in wild type. So what they said, that this model probably might not be true, because even after deleting this, the SEN1 toxicity is not elevated. These are RAD2 and RNT1 are non-essential, but SRS2 essential. Neither the deletion of RAD2, RNT1 nor the SRS2 could elevate SEN1 toxicity. So they made a conclusion that yes, this model is not correct. Probably this could be correct. So how to test this? So they've taken many number of a large number of mutants which were defective in various termination complexes. So if it is true that higher cellular SEN1 levels caused excessive and cytotoxic termination in wild type cells, then such overactivity should be offset and tolerated in transcription termination. So that is what we were talking about, right? So if they were toxic in wild type SEN1 overexpression, it should not be toxic for the cell in mutants. So they wanted to check this. So they've taken temperature sensitive mutants of a wide range of which were mutated in transcription termination factors. So they made several observations. Observation 1 was NAB311, PCF11 temperature mutant and PCF11 temperature mutant are specifically known to disrupt NNS. But low leaky GAL1 promoter expression of SEN1 on glucose suppresses temperature sensitivity. Like if you see here in the PCF11, this particular mutant and this particular mutant, low leaky galactose was able to make the cell survive to some extent, but then galactose overexpression is killing the cells, right? It should, if the excess activity model were right, it should not kill the cells. But here you see that overexpression of galactose is killing the cells. This was one observation they made. And the second observation was that in the few mutants, higher level SEN1 expression is toxic and low level SEN1 fails to suppress temperature sensitivity. We observed that low leaky levels was able to suppress temperature sensitivity, but few of them showed that here they couldn't suppress the temperature sensitivity. But the most important and third observation is that several mutants in CPF-associated APD complex could withstand GAL-induced SEN1 overexpression. This is what we are looking for, right? If overexpression is able to make the cell still survive, that means that the excess activity model was true. So yes, they found this true. How? These are the few mutants like RF2 delta, PTA1 at 37 degrees. So what this explains is that in the temperature sensitive mutants, Okay, what is happening is here is galactose is an on state, but still the cells are surviving. These are temperature sensitive mutants which are supposed to, if they were wild type, they would die on the, if they were wild type, they would die on overexpression of SEN1 and would survive in the overexpression of SEN1 in temperature sensitivity. So you can see that yes, the overexpression is still able to make the cell survive. Even in this case, SSU72 is a temperature sensitive mutant of APT complex, and you can see that in the galactose on condition, it is able to survive the overexpression. And even here, you could see that REF2 delta was able to survive on galactose overexpression, this temperature sensitive mutants. So these are all in accordance with the assumption that we made, saying overexpression of SEN1 is able to repress temperature sensitivity. So now they wanted to check if this was purely because of SEN1 or even other transcription termination factors were being regulated. They looked at PCF11 factors, PCF11 factor and NRD1. All the levels were same, only the SEN1 MYC levels were changing even after 24 hours of induction. So finally, they wanted to check, is tolerance to overexpression due to impaired SEN1? Are we looking at the right thing? Is it because that SEN1 MYC expression is somehow impaired and it is not overexpressing? That is why we are seeing that the cells are surviving. So to make sure of this, they have taken an RNA blot in which they have these REF2 cells and PTA1 cells, which are temperature sensitive mutants I was talking about in the previous slide, which showed that overexpression of SEN1 in temperature sensitive mutants is suppressing the temperature sensitivity. So the SEN1 levels, the SEN1 mRNA levels were actually very high, were very highly overexpressed, but then the cell survived. Even in case of PTA1 temperature sensitive mutants, the SEN1 mRNA levels were high. That means it was being overexpressed. Yes, it was not due to impaired SEN1 MYC expression. So they concluded that SEN1 overexpression could be toxic because of increased transcription termination activity in wild type cells, but as offsets in cells with decreased APT2. Even if you look at this assay, these are the wild type cells. All right. When SEN1 is being overexpressed, the cells are dying. But whereas in the temperature sensitive mutants, when you overexpress SEN1, the cells are not dying. Even in the case of PTA1 temperature sensitive mutant, overexpression of SEN1 is not killing the cells. So from the mRNA analysis, we know that SEN1 expression is same in wild type and mutant cells. So this gives evidence that excessive activity model is true. So here in this case, they are looking at this readout SNR33 YCR015C. This is similar to SNR13 TRS31 transcript that we were looking earlier. If this transcription was not terminated, this extension of transcription would also lead to the transcription of this. Okay, now this is the readout for failed transcription termination. So in this case, in the wild type cells, you are not finding any band in case of vector or SEN1, and in case of REF2 deleted cells, you are seeing that this transcript is being formed in the termination mutant. So, but this is very low in the empty. If you see the numbers here, in this case, SEN1, in this case, this is the temperature sensitive termination mutant, right? So we are looking at these two cases, this case and this case. In case of empty vector, this is the case. You are looking at a very thick band of this readout, SNR33. Like, if you were to quantify, it is at one level. And when your SEN1 is being overexpressed, your termination mutant is suppressed. Right? If you look at the number, there is 7-fold down regulation of this readout. It means that yes, the overexpression of SEN1 is able to terminate the transcription at this point. It is the same case with even PTA1 temperature sensitive mutant of transcription termination. You could see that there is a seven-fold down regulation. So this is how they said that these are the this is the whole conclusion of the paper, which I would summarize. First, SEN1 levels are regulated through cell cycle. In the G1 phase, there is the down regulation of SEN1, which increases towards G2 S phase. And then ubiquitin proteasome system mediated degradation decreases protein levels 3 to 10 fold in G1 relative to other cell cycle stages. Yes, we looked at this image even earlier when in the presence of proteasome inhibitor, SEN1 was being stabilized. In the absence of proteasome inhibitor, SEN1 levels were being degraded. And then the third conclusion is that limiting SEN1 is essential. Overexpression or deletion of SEN1 degradation sequence results in reduced cell viability. If the SEN1 is not being degraded in the cell, it is causing the cell to die. And then the fourth conclusion is that SEN1 toxicity results from excess termination activity. So as we looked at in the transcription termination mutants, overexpression of SEN1 is causing the cells to live and not die. So that is the paper. I would conclude here. If you have any queries, you can ask.